Hi, I'm Kevin Boyle. Welcome to Wood Magazine's studio. Today we're going to be doing a video about vacuum bag veneering. So I don't want people to run away scared at this point because it's something scary and something new, and this may seem intimidating to some. It's not. It is super easy thing to do. It's going to require maybe to upgrade to some equipment that you might not own, but I promise you I will try to steer you in a direction where we don't have to spend thousands of dollars to get into this process. Veneering is one of those things that I think all woodworkers should eventually learn how to do. I mean, it just opens the doors to creating projects that you might not have been able to do before because, one, you can create your own plywood. And maybe you're dealing with a wood that doesn't have a plywood that's at the store that's regular, like oaks and maples and cherries and walnuts and whatnot, but it opens up the door to multiple species of, almost all species of lumber that you can match that with and create projects that you wouldn't normally be able to do. So that's one of the really big benefits about veneer. The other thing I want to say about veneer is as a whole very inexpensive because let's face it, we're dealing with some pretty thin wood, right? So stuff that's not thick lowers the price and you get more for your bang for your buck. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about veneer. There are several suppliers that I deal with across the internet. I will mention two of these. They're not sponsors by any means, and I'm getting no kickbacks, but I've had really good luck with these companies. And one is certainly Wood. They actually have, in both of these websites, veneersupplies.com and certainly Wood both, have photos of the veneer on their website. So you can go to the website, look at the veneers, zoom in on them, and really check out, if it's got quilting that you want, is it straight grained, and they have thousands of veneers. There's people on the other end of the phone that are knowledgeable, and then they can talk to you about what you need. A lot of times you can actually say, hey, I've got this project and I need to cover this much square foot. They'll send you the veneer and probably a little extra to make sure you can do that project. One thing you need to think about when you're ordering veneer is not only you're going to veneer one face, but you're going to veneer the opposite face. So in almost all instances, especially when you're dealing with a wood substrate. And I will get into an example later on that we're not dealing with wood. But for now, just think about this where I've got to veneer both faces of this, and the reason for that is to keep that panel flat. So if you put wet glue and veneer on one side and that starts to dry up, it's going to make that panel cup. So you have to put a piece of veneer on the other side with that wet glue to counteract that. Not saying that that panel might not move on you a little bit, but it will certainly remove that risk greatly, okay? So buying veneer, make sure you buy extra, make sure you buy enough for both sides of the panel you're going to do. These two companies I mentioned, and most of them that deal specifically in veneer where you're buying that, the veneer will come in flitches. And a flitch basically is where they've taken the tree, whether it's however they cut the veneer, if it was just shaved off or if it was radially cut. Those veneers get laid together. It's one right on top of the other, and you want to, for your project, you want to certainly get those veneers together. So when you're buying those, you want to make sure that you're buying those veneers that are sequential in that flitch. So basically in this example here, I've got two pieces of veneer, and you can see that they're pretty close cousins here because you've got that sapwood. I mean, you look at the grain moving across here, that stuff is, it would be hard to tell those two pieces apart, right? So what that does, it gives you one, same color, so you're getting a great color match with your veneer, but it also gives you some opportunities for some, fancier sort of things when you're doing. I mean, we can do a slip match where we're just basically putting pieces together right next to each other, and they call it slip match because you're basically slipping that veneer off the top, sliding next to its cousin right below. Another one would be, that we do typically for decorative panels is a book match. And I'm going to kind of try to do that today. So you're mirroring those two pieces. And there's lots of different ways of sticking veneer together, parquet, radial matches, all kinds of stuff that you can do. But Today we're just going to do a nice little slip match, or book match, I should say. And then we're going to glue it up. I'm going to show you how everything we need to do with the back. So that's a little bit about the veneer. I want to talk about substrate just briefly. I will tell you that my favorite is MDF. If it's not necessary that this is a non-structural member, then an MDF is my number 1 choice because it's flat. It's going to accept glue easily. The tendency for just MDF in general to warp or cup when it's sitting in your shop is very low. It's a very stable product. Now, if I'm doing a project where I need to drive screws and I'm depending upon some structural fortitude with this, then I will use a combi core plywood, which has usually a veneer outer and a ply center. Very stable, but also gives you that structural integrity that you need. So really those are my 2 favorite materials to use, relatively inexpensive again. So MDF is not terribly pricey. It can be quite heavy, but not pricey. Glue. Now this is where I'm going to cause some controversy more than likely. I've been doing this for a better part of 20-some years, and I have had not any problems with the methods that I use. Now, I'm not saying that going out and buying specialized veneer glue is a bad thing. I've used those too, and they do work. I've used all these products right here. Titebond makes a cold press for veneer. I use this product. I actually use it on a panel that we'll show later on. And I do use Titebond 3, and I use Titebond 2. And the reason I use those are they give me plenty of time to set up. And I trust them. I trust these glues. I've used them in my projects for decades. They work well. Not saying that these other glues are bad, just saying this is what I've used and it works great. Titebond 3 generally is what I use because of just the setup time. When I'm dealing with walnut or darker wood, sometimes I'll use that Titebond 2 because if I do get a little bleed through here or there or something happens, it blends in a lot better. There are situations where I have used epoxy to glue veneer on, and that was actually, and I'll show you that real quick, just so you can kind of see something new. We actually did this as a project in the magazine, but I actually glued this veneer onto plexiglass with epoxy. We did this as a lamp, so it's the reason I did it so you can actually see light through that. Kind of creates a nice effect. So epoxy does work. Generally don't use that when I'm using a wood substrate. So let's get to the fun part, right? A lot of these things you probably already have in the shop. There might be some things here that are a little unique to you, but steel rules. I mean, having a selection of steel rules that are long, having a 5-foot steel rule or 4-foot steel rule can be very handy. I use these a lot. The other thing that I do is I like to take some 150 adhesive back sandpaper and put that on the back of those rulers. So one of the frustrations when cutting veneer is trying to hold that ruler steady. This will grip that veneer a lot better, and you can get a better chance of having a successful cut. So one little modification I do to my rulers. Tape. This is another thing where there are several methods of taping veneers together, and you undoubtedly will have a situation where you're going to have to join veneer. There is specific veneer tape that it's a wetted tape that as it dries, it pulls the veneers together tighter, joint tighter together. I have used it. I prefer not to because to me it's just messy. I have been using blue painter's tape for many, many years, decades. As long as your seam that you're cutting to pull those veneers together is a good seam, you shouldn't have to apply that much pressure to pull those together. Thus, the blue painter's tape works really well. They make tape that is stretchy tape, blue painter's tape stretchy tape, that actually you can put it across the joint and it again acts as kind of a rubber band type pulling that together. It's one of those things where I'll say, hey, this is an entry level, but I'm still using it. The veneer tape stuff does work very well. It does require a little bit more effort as far as having a dispenser to wet it and cut it, put it down, whatever, and then you're going to have to remove it at the end of the day. So this just peels off. Foam rollers. This is a close cell foam roller, and I use this for rolling out glue. These are reusable, since I just head to the sink after I'm done, wash it out, keep on using it. Don't forget to wash it out, or otherwise you'll be buying a new one. These come in different sizes. I just usually stick with a 6 or a 4-inch. Usually work pretty well for what I'm doing. Knives. I use an X-Acto knife. It's a little fancier than X-Acto knife, but basically that's what this is. And utility knives, just make sure you have plenty of sharp blades on hand. So veneer saws. Now that's maybe something new to you guys, but veneer saws have been around forever and ever. This little unit right here, you can buy at just about any woodworking company in the country, including out of the country. These are very common. This is a common design. It's been around for a long time, a lot longer than me. What you're looking for in a veneer saw is a curved blade, okay? That's what really kind of makes the veneer saw a veneer saw. And the reason for that is when you're cutting veneer, you're making sure that your heel is not digging into that veneer and ripping it as you're cutting. Vice versa, if you're cutting both directions, the toe is not going to catch and rip that veneer out when you're getting closer to the edge. I'll demonstrate this for you in just a few seconds, but that's the point of that. Have that curved blade. This happens to be flush on one side, which is really handy when you're running it up against a straight edge. So you can keep that nice and tight. All right. This is just another version. It's got a little finer tooth, but it does have that curved blade as well. These are great for cutting veneers, and I use these quite a bit. And then I had a project that I did several years ago where the veneer was, the panels I was gluing up were in excess of 9 feet long, 24 inches wide. And to cut that long of a seam and to get it perfect with this veneer saw or a knife was almost impossible in my mind. At the time, I had just acquired a track saw. Now, I know people go, oh my gosh, you're crazy. And I'm like, no, this really works well. And if you have one, you'll try it out, and trust me. What you're doing is you're getting I use a plate that I put down as basically, this is a sacrificial piece of plywood. Put it down, I've got 0 clearance top and bottom on that cut. It makes the perfect straight cut. It makes a perfect seam almost every single time. Works great. If you don't have a track saw, I would suggest making some tracks for your little circular saw you have and slap on a 60-tooth blade, and you can get the same results with a power tool. So this isn't for every single project that I do, but I'm going to demonstrate that as well too. It does work really well, and it's something that, you know, if you're doing a lot of veneer work and you know you're doing longer and bigger panels, that tool really does help out a lot. Veneer bags. So there's really, I would say, kind of 2 basic types of bags that I've come across on the market. I don't have both here today. What I have here is a polyurethane bag, which is what I prefer. There's polyurethane and vinyl. And the difference being vinyl is usually a very stiff, rigid bag. And over time, I believe that the polyurethane bags hold up over time. The vinyl tends to get a little bit brittle with age. I've had this bag for probably 10 years and I haven't had to fix it yet. So the Veneer Supplies company, they sell these bags. They actually sell them, and I think you can get them in almost whatever length you want up to a certain extent. So me talking about doing an 8-foot long panel, I was able to buy a bag that I could slide that into that bag, right? And these just come with, they're open-ended. They just come with these closures. Let's snap it off. You got a little valve there. The other thing I use quite a bit is this mesh, and this is not screen. It's a screen. It's not like a screen door screen, but it's that premise. So what you need is you will need some of this breather mesh. And what that does, it sits below that nozzle and allows that air to be pulled towards that nozzle. You don't need to cover your entire project top and bottom with this, but you do need to, I do like to put it in so it at least goes from side to side in the bag. Bags. And then I'm briefly going to talk about pumps. Vacuum pumps, I mean, you could pick up a vacuum pump ready to do vacuum bag veneering. under $300, okay? The bag's gonna cost you a little bit of money, but the first vacuum pump I actually bought a little pump from Granger, and I made my own Venturi valve and created my own little continuous run vacuum pump. So it's like how, if you guys are, you know, kind of those do-it-yourselfer kind of guy or gal, that's a great way to go to make an inexpensive vacuum pump. What you're looking for is, and just the technical stuff, and you'll see this because when you're looking at them and you get confused about buying them, your two big things are CFM and Mercury inch pounds. And Mercury inch pounds is just, I'm not a meteorologist or a scientist, but what it is, it's a measure of pressure. So you're looking for something in the range of 25.5 Mercury inch pounds, which is H, capital H, little g, inch. That is really what is about as max as you can get, okay? CFM is, a three CFM pump is gonna be worlds for most hobby woodworkers. Where you need the higher CFM is where you've got much bigger bags, and it's the CFM is really what's coming down to take that air out of the bag. So it's how fast do you need that to happen? So, you know, if you're dealing with little projects, one CFM pump may be plenty. So those are the only two numbers you really need to look at that. And I kind of aim for the middle on the CFM, and that make sure that the Mercury inch pounds is in that 20s, 21 to 25 range. One more thing I wanted to mention, this is a veneer softener. A lot of veneers, you know, we're domestic, like flat sawn or recorder sawn or those type of veneers like this, they come flat. They are usually flat other than this curl because they ship them curled up in a roll. They come flat, but sometimes when you're ordering this a burl, these could come really rough, and I have flattened this, but because you want to do that, because when you are applying pressure, and you'll see here later on, if you can use Platens, and a lot of guys will insist on using Platens in their vacuum bag. I don't always use them. But when you're doing a burled type veneer, you will want to basically wet this down and then put it in the bag or put it between Platens to flatten it. Because it takes out all those bumps and curves, and you'll see if you ever get into a burl project, it is a lot more unforgiving as far as being flat. And you want it flat because that's how you're going to get that good adhesion across the entire panel. The other thing this stuff does, and then you can use it on anything, but it makes veneers that might be very rigid and almost breaking in your hands because they're so dry and so brittle. This kind of softens it back up a little bit. Even though this is dry, that softener actually softened those wood fibers a little bit. So you can bend it. It's really nice if you're doing stuff when you're veneering around curves. This is really, really helpful. So instead of snapping that veneer, it gives you a chance to kind of bend around those curves. All right, well worth it. You don't have to use a lot. Basically what it is, you spray it on. I usually put it between some towels, and then I stick it in the bag and leave it overnight. I've got a couple scrap pieces here. I just want to demonstrate a little bit about cutting, and then we're going to grab our work pieces and get those cut to size. So the first thing I want to talk about is cross cutting. Okay, so cutting to length. And like I said, you know, we've got saws here that work really well. We've got knives that work well. The one thing about knives, and I do use them more for cross cutting, but when you're doing this, do not go clear across that panel, because when you're cutting, a lot of times you will break that off. Okay, as you come through pulling, you're pulling that grain apart, it will break it. So if you're going to do that, I try to cut a little bit from the other end so I'm not cutting out that side. And this is a several pass sort of thing. Don't try to just get it all in that first pass, okay? And it will cut cleanly. Same thing, the utility knife can work as well. It's a little cruder. So the one thing then about cutting down the veneer with a knife is something I recommend to not do unless this is your only method of cutting, okay? The problem with the knife, is it wants to follow that wood grain. And if we're cutting down this panel, for example, here, you can kind of see that wood grain's kind of running off at an angle. So if I'm cutting on the outside of that, the knife might want to follow that as opposed to trying to follow my straight edge. So it's really hard to get a good straight cut with a knife going down the edge like that. So this is where I would prefer to use a saw. And again, it's kind of the same process where you're taking your time with that, making sure you stay nice and snug up against that straight edge. And you know, I'm just going one way. You can certainly go the other way if you want. This is what I prefer. It may take a few passes, it's okay. But eventually it'll come right off there, okay? Makes a nice clean cut. Generally when I'm using these little saws and knives, I try to avoid cutting more than one piece of veneer. Just, it's a lot to do and you want to make sure you do a nice fine cut. And then of course, the other little method I wanted to show real quick. So I got my two pieces that I want to put together. I'm going to have one seam. And I think I'm going to do a book match. So I'm basically going to flip that top piece over. And so we need to get that seam down the middle nice and straight. And I don't know if you can see that very well, but you know, this edge is pretty rough. So this is the sap side, so obviously it was the rough side. So we're going to book match these. So we need to clean up that edge. So I'm going to put these together, flush at the ends, and as flush as I can on that outside edge. And because this is my book match side, I'm putting the two pieces together. I'm going to take as little material off as I can, is basically because I want to make sure that book match comes together really cleanly. Okay, so I've got a nice, really nice straight edge there, made a nice clean cut. All right, so now I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to use this as my substrate here. So my substrate's about 16 inches wide. I like to make my veneer slightly less than my substrate. So if I ended up needing a 15-inch panel, I may cut a 16-inch panel, but that way the veneer, I keep the veneer inside the edge of that plywood. And mainly it's in the bag if I'm not using Platens, or even if I am, if the veneer is overhanging that edge, you know, you have a hard time getting a straight edge there, okay? You'd have to have a track saw or something like that. But if you leave that edge unglued or the veneer's not hanging over the edge of that, it gives you that reference edge to go to your saw and start trimming this panel down. So I like to stay inside that substrate. So we're about 16, so we'll cut these a little short. Forgot to show you, these are kind of handy to have. If you're kind of working with veneer that's kind of bubbly like that and wants to get unruly, those blocks sometimes help out a little bit holding that down. I forgot to show you those. So now I'm just lining up my track to make this final cut. So you guys can kind of see why I'm kind of attached to the track saw, when that would have taken me quite a long time to cut those veneers with that. So when I'm doing bigger stuff, I really don't have a problem using the track saw. Like I said, you can use a circular saw with a make your own fence. So, all right, so we got those ready to go. So next up is we're going to put these together. I'm going to flip top sheet over so we can complete our book match. And I'm just going to start pulling those together and throwing some short pieces of tape, kind of as stitches across the joint. And we're going to go about every 3-4 inches. And I'm just going to work down the panel. One thing you want to be careful of, whether you're putting pieces across the seam like this, which I get to the end, I try to stay pretty close to the end, but don't get too close to the end because you don't want to get any, make sure you get any tape that goes around that veneer on the other side, because you'll end up with tape on the wrong side. So once I've got that done, I like to run a piece all the way down just as a reinforcement, and then we'll just kind of cut that off the end. So right here on the end, this happens. If you can barely see that I've got a split, and this happens a lot. I mean, it's frustrating, but it does happen. And honestly, this is how you do that. You basically pretend like it's another seam. Obviously, if it's a big one and something broke out, you might have to do something a little different. But normally what you can do is kind of put those right back in where that split occurred. Throw a piece of tape on it, and usually she's just fine, okay? So we're taped up. I wanted to show you guys how I thought about this. If you end up cutting this, whether you cut it with a handsaw or the power saw or whatever, another little trick in your arsenal is, say we made that cut along there with our handsaw or with our power saw and we just can't get it to stop chipping out. What I like to do is put those two pieces back together, noticing where the grain is going, and then sticking those in between two sacrificial pieces of plywood generally. Now I want that veneer, make sure it's all the way down inside that. And then I'm going to take a couple clamps and clamp this up. I'm just sandwiching this together, okay? And then we're going to run over to the joiner and we're going to clean up this edge. I'm going to make 2 or 3 passes probably, maybe 4. So I make sure I'm really taking getting the veneer, that edge really, really jointed, okay? So we're going to head over there and do that real quick. All right, so I got those jointed, and I'm just checking that seam, and I can see that I really cleaned that up, and those are going to go together just absolutely flawlessly. So another tool in your bag for that. I will tell you that even without a joiner, having the ability to clamp these together, even if it's on your workbench, clamping those down is making sure those are flush, and is you can come in with a sanding block, a joiner plane. You want to make a good cut. It's all the way across. So there are some ways of doing this with hand tools, but for efficiency's sake, the joiner works really well with that if you're cutting this with a hand saw, or you're even struggling with the power saw. So just another way of trying to clean that veneer up and get a really, really nice joint. For the back side of this piece, I am using a solid piece of veneer, one big sheet, and it's just and for no other reason than I've already shown you how to tape one together, and this is just another sheet of full sheet of. This was actually some of that burl that I was talking about earlier. So I'm going to put that on the back side, just so you know where that's coming from. So before I add glue to anything, even though the set time on this glue takes quite a while and you have plenty of time to work with, I still like to get everything kind of set up. I always leave a little tape at arm's length, because sometimes when you're running into the bag, the veneer might curl up, and you're going to see that. I'll be taping these corners down just so they stay down during the process of sliding it into the bag. So the next big question, the next big conundrum is, how much glue do you use? So the answer is not too much, but make sure it's enough. You want the surface wet, okay, but you really do not want pools of glue. What happens is wood is porous, some more porous than others, and if you happen to get too much glue and it pools up in an area, what happens is that press will push that glue, it'll pull it right through the veneer, and you'll end up with little droplets of glue, or sometimes maybe even glue spots that won't sand out. Okay, so it's always easier to start with just a minimal amount of glue, and if you have to come back where you've got a dry spot, you can add some. But it's a lot more challenging to come in here and scrape glue off. Big mess. So just my word of warning is less is more. So you can see that's spreading out really well. You can see how much I really applied there. I didn't get real crazy, but I'm able to kind of bridge the gaps between those. Might be a little light down here. And you notice I don't really have any big pools of glue anywhere either, which is really important. Well, you want to really make sure you cover every square inch because, unlike when you're maybe gluing a couple boards together, sometimes we get lazy and we don't maybe spread the glue out, but that glue kind of hydraulically moves out that, covers through the joint pretty well. This won't. So you want to make sure you get everything covered. All right, so I'm calling it my backer sheet on the substrate. Flip it over. So I was talking earlier that I'm not using Platens in this demonstration. You certainly can. If I was using Platens to do this, I would put wax paper between the Platens and my veneer. So it adds another thing that you're going to have to struggle with getting it in the bag. But if you do use Platens, you definitely want to use wax paper. Or I have seen this, and I have not tried this, but I don't know why it wouldn't work, but is to use some sort of packing tape. Just cover your Platens with packing tape because the glue will not stick to that. These type of glues wouldn't stick to that. All right, so I'm laying that on there. Make sure it's centered best as you can. And this is where you can kind of see how that's starting to curl up on the corners. I'm just going to take a simple piece of tape and go around those corners. And that way, when I finally get to sliding this in the bag, it doesn't fight me quite as bad. Okay. So this is where having an extra set of hands in the shop sometimes can be handy. Just to kind of hold the bag open, depending on the size of the sandwich you're kind of stuffing in there. I highly recommend don't asking your wife to do it, especially if she's prone to feelings getting hurt when you're yelling at her because she's not doing something right. So just a little word of warning there. All seriousness, sometimes it does help to have someone kind of hold the bag open and help you slide it in there. Again, this Titebond 3 and almost all of the veneer glues I've used give you plenty of time to get it in the bag, get it sealed up, and get the pump on. And you can see these closures work pretty quick. If your bag's a little long, obviously, move your closure closer to your workpiece. And then I'm going to stick that on. And we're off. And you can see how fast that took it down. So it's done. You can see it has sucked all the air out of that bag. It's tight against the corners. And as you can see, I know there's the people who insist on using Platens. You can see this is laying flat. I've got 1,700 pounds per square foot on this bag. So it's holding it down. So I'd let that rest for about an hour. So go grab some coffee or whatever, and we'll be back in about an hour. The one thing I like to do, and the reason I like to get it out of the bag, is when I do use this blue tape, the longer it sits in, I don't know if you've ever noticed this about blue tape, but the longer it stays on the substrate it's on, the harder it is to get off, okay? Now, you can imagine it's got 1,700 pounds of pressure on this. I've embedded this glue, or this tape. I wanted it not to move, right? But so as soon as I get it out of the bag, I like to start working to get that tape off, okay? So the word of caution here, this is not a Band-Aid, so don't just grip it and rip it, all right? You'll notice as I start to pull that tape, I'm pulling that on a bias. It tends to not grab the grain of the wood as bad. And I go slow, and if I see some fibers start to pull up, I will switch directions, and if that doesn't work, I'll start at the other end of that tape and work back the other way, okay? So take your time when you're pulling that tape off. If you're really struggling with this, and you got some veneer that's just stringy and it doesn't want to cooperate, go steal your wife's hairdryer or your hairdryer. You're not wanting to cook this tape, and don't use a heat gun. Don't use a heat gun. Hairdryer only is plenty hot. You can warm that tape up. It will soften that adhesive and make this job a little easier if you need be. I would try to avoid it. It's kind of another, I won't say last resort, but kind of one of those things you really don't want to do too much, because you don't want to really heat that glue up and risk a failure, okay? Glue's still kind of young. So basically, I'm going through, pulling off my tape, getting it cleaned up, and that's basically what we just did. We just did that book match. So you can see that turns out real nice. And it's something that you really have a hard time finding at the plywood hardwood store in your town. So guys, veneering is simple. I hope that, showing you some of these little tools gives you kind of the confidence to go try this. Veneering, we briefly talked about this, but veneering can be as simple as a couple calls, some wax paper, and and a substrate, right? This is super simple. All you need is probably a half dozen little clamps. Sandwich this veneer, and this was acrylic, but this could be wood too. Super simple way to make veneer panels. Make sure you like and subscribe and leave comments. We'd love to know what videos you'd like to see down the road. Hope you enjoyed the video, and join us at woodmagazine.com, and we'll see you next time.